Okay, imagine this for a second. You got a really street smart guy, kind of no nonsense, straight out of Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, someone who lives by instinct, by what works on the street. And you put him in a debate with, well, the greatest philosopher of ancient Greece, Socrates, a guy whose whole deal was asking questions, defining things relentlessly. What does that sound like?
Yeah. It sounds like a setup for something interesting, doesn't it? Would it just be a complete clash? Oil and water?
Mhm.
Or maybe something surprisingly insightful could come out of it.
Exactly. Could it challenge how we even think about wisdom, about what knowing something really means?
I think it forces you to look at the nature of truth itself and maybe the limits of pure logic. How we actually manage to get by in a world that's, let's face it, way messier than our neat little theories often suggest.
Right. And this isn't just like a fun thought experiment. It's about making better choices in reality, which is always unpredictable. So welcome everyone to the deep dive. This is where we really try to go beyond the surface, unpack these big complex ideas, grab the key insights, and hopefully give you a bit of a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed.
And today we are absolutely diving deep. We're looking at excerpts from Nassim Taleb's Antifragile, which is, it's a book that just throws conventional wisdom out the window, really. It forces you to rethink risk, knowledge, how systems work, maybe even life itself.
Yeah, our mission today is pretty clear. Pull out the most vital nuggets of knowledge from these excerpts, stuff you can actually use to navigate, this complex, often unpredictable world we're in. A world where sometimes maybe what you don't know or can't easily define can be a source of strength.
Definitely. Our sources are these rich discussions, direct bits from Antifragile.
Hmm.
So you get this blend of deep philosophical questions, but also really practical, street-smart wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, a pretty critical look at some modern institutions. We'll get into that.
We're going to hit core ideas like the barbell strategy, which sounds intriguing already, and we'll definitely explore that hypothetical showdown, Fat Tony versus Socrates.
Oh, yeah.
And look at this idea of why maybe in the real world, the payoff, the consequences, often matters way more than just whether something is technically true.
It's going to be a journey, I think. It'll make you question some assumptions about how you learn, how you decide things, maybe even how you thrive.
Okay, let's start there. Let's unpack this first big idea, the barbell strategy. It sounds wrong at first, doesn't it?
Yeah, a little bit.
Because we're always told, balance is key. Moderation. Find the middle ground. Diet, investments, your schedule,
Yeah.
everything.
The sensible approach.
But Taleb seems to be flipping that completely. He's saying, no, it's not about the middle ground.
Not at all. And that's what's so fascinating. He actually argues that that kind of middle-of-the-road approach, that perfect balance, can be incredibly fragile, especially in certain situations.
Fragile? How so?
Well, think about it. If you spread your resources, say, very thinly across lots of moderate options, you might feel safe, diversified, but you might just be exposed to lots of small risks that could all fail together if something big and unexpected happens. You're sort of betting on normality.
Okay.
So instead, he proposes the barbell. With some metaphor, obviously, for a more robust way of living, of making decisions.
So the picture is like an actual barbell, right? Heavy weights at the ends, nothing much in the middle.
Exactly.
So the idea is you make one part of your life super secure, like extremely conservative, low risk.
Ultra low risk, yeah.
Your safe zone. And then the other part, maybe a smaller part, you expose it to what? Wild swings, huge potential upside.
Extreme, potentially unlimited upside. That's the key.
Yeah.
It's asymmetric.
So you're minimizing the chance of getting wiped out, but maximizing the chance of a huge win. You ditch the vulnerable middle.
Precisely. It's about structuring things. So your downside is capped, but your upside isn't. That conventional wisdom, balance everything out, that often just creates this illusion of routine, of safety.
Yeah.
And Taleb says, look, that's maybe fine if you live in what he calls mediocriston.
Mediocriston. Okay, what's that?
That's where things are kind of predictable. They cluster around an average, like human height, or maybe daily calorie intake for a population. A single really tall person doesn't drastically change the average height. Right. Outliers don't break the system.
Got it. Normal distribution, bell curves, that sort of thing.
Yeah, more or less. But, and this is crucial, the real world, especially areas like finance, tech, history, social systems, operates more like extremistan.
Extremistan, I like that. So this is where the craziest stuff happens.
This is where the highly improbable but massively impactful events dominate. The black swans, as he famously calls them.
Right, those things that seem impossible before they happen but obvious afterwards, like the internet suddenly taking off or the 2008 crash or maybe a huge scientific discovery nobody saw coming.
Exactly. And in Extremistan, a single event, a single outlier, can change everything. Your standard RIC models, your predictions based on the past, they often just fall apart.
Because the past doesn't reliably predict the future in those
That's
domains.
precisely. And in that kind of world, that moderate, balanced approach, it can actually be the most vulnerable. It tries to absorb everything bit by bit, but a big shock can just shatter it.
So the barbell is the strategy for Extremistan. A secure base plus this aggressive high upside gamble on the other end.
Yeah, it's far more resilient, he argues,
Hmm.
and potentially far more beneficial than trying to maintain some delicate middle ground that might just break under pressure.
Yeah.
It's not just about managing risk either. It's fundamentally about cultivating optionality,
Optionality, meaning
meaning having the right, but not the obligation, to take advantage of good situations when they pop up, without being forced to suffer the downsides if things go wrong.
okay, so you set yourself up to benefit from luck, from randomness, without being destroyed by it.
That's a great way to put it. It's really a blueprint for living, for thriving, in a world that's inherently chaotic and unpredictable.
What's really hitting me is how this isn't just finance advice. I mean, it clearly applies there, but it feels bigger, like a fundamental way to approach uncertainty in, well, in everything.
Oh, absolutely.
How does Taleb show it applying more broadly? You mentioned education earlier. How does the barbell play out there?
Okay, yeah, education is a great example. So the secure side of the barbell, that's like getting the guaranteed standard education, the degree, the thing society kind of expects or demands. It gives you that baseline credential, the safety net. You've ticked the box.
That's your conservative, low-risk end. Got it. The baseline. But where's the extremist stand potential? The unlimited upside in learning.
Ah, that comes from the other end. It comes from, well, everything outside the standard curriculum, often. Think about the truly infinite potential you might find in just exploring a library randomly, or reading one single book that completely blows your mind and changes your perspective, or having deep, challenging conversations with really smart, interesting people, or even just stumbling across insightful stuff online, videos, audiobooks, podcasts.
So anything that broadens your horizons way beyond the structured syllabus.
Exactly. It's about embracing that curiosity without limits, allowing for those serendipitous discoveries. That's where the potentially huge transformative insights often lie.
Right. So it's not just passively receiving information in a classroom, it's actively seeking out those moments of infinite potential.
Yeah, the stuff a rigid schedule might prevent. He uses the example of this character, Nero Tulip, who sticks religiously to his fixed schedule, never meets anyone new, totally predictable.
Okay, so Nero's life is pure mediocristan. No surprises, good or bad.
Right. Contrast that with someone who gets, say, a totally unexpected free invitation to some interesting party in London.
Ah, so that invitation represents.
Optionality. It's a free upside. He can choose to go, maybe something amazing happens, maybe he meets someone incredible, maybe he learns something vital, or he can just say, no thanks, no downside.
Okay, so the barbell in life is secure predictability on one side and this pure asymmetric upside potential on the other. You're protected from the worst, positioned for the best.
You got it. And it applies beyond education, too. Finance, we touched on that. You might have, say, 90% of your money in super safe bonds or cash. Ultra conservative.
Secure base.
And then maybe 10% in highly speculative stuff. Venture capital, crypto, some wild bet, stuff that could go to zero, or it could go up 100x.
Okay, the barbell. Minimize ruin, maximize lottery ticket upside.
Yeah, that's the financial version. But it extends to life choices, too, like, say, publishing a book. Well, you put in the work, right? You write it, you get it out there. That's the secure effort, the base. But the potential upside, it's infinite, really. You have no idea how people will react, what doors it might open, what connections it might spark. It's pure optionality.
So the principle is secure one part of your life, make it safe, and then expose another part to this infinite open look. You build in that chance for massive, unexpected good fortune.
Absolutely. You design your life for positive surprises. Even applies to health and fitness.
Really? How does the barbell work for staying healthy?
Well, the secure limited side could be making really consistent, small, safe improvements, like in the gym. Adding just tiny amounts of weight, like 50 grams, 100 grams to your list. Super gradual.
So avoiding big, risky jumps that might cause injury, but making steady, almost invisible progress.
Exactly. Building that robust base slowly, safely, reducing fragility. That's the conservative end.
Okay, so where's the extremist upside in health?
The source suggests that this consistent, robust approach, avoiding the fragility that comes from bad habits or risky behaviors, leads to an infinite advantage at the healthy level. It's maybe less about one single massive gain and more about building such a strong foundation that you're resilient to shocks, you recover quickly, and you're open to unexpected peaks in vitality or performance that come from that deep robustness.
I see. So it's about creating a health base that lets you handle life stresses and maybe even thrive because of them, rather than being broken by them.
Yeah, connecting it all to barbell is just such a powerful way to rethink things. It forces you to question that whole moderate middle approach, not just in money, but how you learn, stay healthy, structure your days. It's about embracing intelligent asymmetry, not chasing some fragile illusion of perfect balance.
This is a fantastic framework, and it really sets us up perfectly for the next big piece, doesn't it? This clash of ideas that gets right to the heart of theoretical knowledge versus practical lived wisdom. Let's get into probably one of the most memorable thought experiments in Taleb's work, the hypothetical debate, Fat Tony versus Socrates.
Yes, this part is brilliant. It really lets us explore the difference between what Taleb calls that narrated, intelligible knowledge, the stuff from books, definitions, clear explanations.
The kind Socrates was always chasing.
Exactly. Versus this other kind, this more opaque knowledge that's entirely proven by action. It's tacit, it's intuitive. You know how, but you can't necessarily explain why.
And it challenges the whole idea that everything good or effective must have a clear, definable reason behind it.
Precisely. It questions the supremacy of articulation.
Okay, let's set the scene. Socrates, we all kind of know him, the ultimate questioner, right? Driving people crazy, trying to pin down definitions. The source calls him the first philosopher in the modern sense. Hugely influential, even though he wrote nothing down himself. We know him through Plato and Xenophon.
Right, his students.
And his trial, famously. Accused of corrupting the youth, bringing in new gods. Apparently, he didn't even charge fees. He'd almost pay people to listen. He was so committed to the process.
Yeah, his method, the Socratic method, was all about dialogue. He'd get people to agree to things step by step.
And then trap them, show them their own contradictions, how little clarity they really had.
His goal was to get to the pure essence, the definition, strip away all the fuzzy thinking.
And he really disliked writing, didn't he? Believed answers shouldn't be fixed, written in stone. Dialogue was alive, writing was dead.
That's right. He wanted the dynamic exchange.
He sounds intense, maybe a bit annoying to hang out with. The source mentions his looks weren't great. Belly, bulging eyes, maybe didn't smell great.
Yeah, unprepossessing is the word used.
But despite that, he had this incredible presence, this confidence, this serenity that just drew people in, especially sharp young Athenians.
It shows that real influence isn't about the surface stuff, is it? It's about the mind, the conviction.
Okay, so that's Socrates. Now bring in the counterpoint, Fat Tony.
Fat Tony.
Yeah.
So, interestingly, his character is also presented as slightly distorted by his biographer, this Nero character. Just like Plato might have shaped our view of Socrates. But Tony's insights are described as productive. They lead him to a life of leisure, which he seems to enjoy.
And he shares some traits with Socrates, surprisingly. Both had leisure time, both loved arguing and conversation, and both disliked writing.
Right, but Tony's reason for disliking writing wasn't philosophical. He just almost flunked out of high school in Brooklyn and found it a pain.
Okay, so similar lifestyle, shared aversion to writing, but totally different approaches to knowledge.
Completely different. Tony's superpower, the source says, is he never lets other people frame the question.
Ah, that's interesting.
He teaches that the answer is planted in every question. His rule: never respond with a straight answer to a question that makes no sense to you.
That's actually a really powerful practical technique, isn't it? A defense against getting sucked into pointless debates or bad assumptions.
It's the absolute opposite of Socrates constantly demanding definitions, which leads to the book's reimagining of the Euthyphro dialogue.
Right, where Socrates basically badgered this guy Euthyphro for a definition of piety, and they got nowhere, just ended abruptly.
Yeah.
Frustrating for Socrates.
Yeah. So now imagine Socrates trying that on Fat Tony.
Okay, I'm picturing it. Socrates, tell me, Tony, my good man, what is piety? Give me the universal definition.
And Tony, he doesn't play that game. He just sidesteps. He uses these practical, almost folksy analogies that completely derail Socrates' method.
Like what?
Like, Tony might say, Socrates, let me ask you something. Does a baby gotta define mother's milk, know its chemical makeup, its nutritional value to know it needs to drink it?
And Socrates, being intellectually honest, would have to say,
No, he does not need to.
yeah.
Instinct drives the baby.
Okay, analogy one. What else?
Then Tony hits him with the dog analogy. Does a dog need to define owner or loyalty? Does it need a philosophical treatise on companionship to be loyal?
And Socrates again would say,
That dogs act on instinct. They don't need reflection or definitions.
right. So Tony's setting him up. Where does he go with it?
This is the killer punch.
Yeah.
Tony says, okay, humans aren't dogs, sure, but are we completely stripped off instincts? Do we only do things we can perfectly define and explain? He challenges the whole premise. Why do we need to limit life to what we can answer in Proto-Brooklyn English or any abstract language?
Wow.
And then Tony's killer line, only suckers wait for answers. Questions are not made for the answers.
Oof, that's a direct hit on the Socratic mission.
It completely rejects the idea that endless questioning for definitions is the path to wisdom. For Tony, it might even be a trap.
So it's a total counter to Socrates' famous, an unexamined life is not worth living. Tony saying maybe over-examining, demanding definitions for everything stops you from living effectively.
Exactly. And Tony has this really sharp, almost patronizing take on why Socrates actually got put to death. Tony claims it was because Socrates made people feel stupid for blindly following habits, instincts, and traditions. The stuff that actually works, even if you can't explain it perfectly.
Ah, so he was undermining the practical wisdom people live by.
Yeah, Tony says Socrates was destroying people's illusion about themselves, taking the joy of ignorance out of the things we don't understand.
The joy of ignorance. That's a provocative phrase.
It is. And crucially, Socrates offered no answer to offer them. He just exposed their lack of definition without providing a workable alternative. For Fat Tony, the key insight is life is not a puzzle to be solved. It is a mystery to be lived. Trying to define everything can strip away useful, hard-won heuristics.
It forces you to ask that question, doesn't it? Is it a mistake to confuse something we can't articulate, the unintelligible, with something that's actually unintelligent?
Yes. It's like mistaking absence of evidence for evidence of absence. Just because you can't explain why something works doesn't mean it doesn't work.
That reminds me of the green lumber story Taleb tells, the super successful trader.
Right, made a fortune trading green lumber.
But when asked, he thought green lumber meant lumber painted green. He had no idea it meant freshly cut, unseasoned wood.
Exactly. He knew how it behaved in the market. He knew how to trade it profitably. The definition was irrelevant to his success. He had the know-how, not necessarily the know-why.
That's Fat Tony's kind of wisdom right there.
Right.
Practical, effective, doesn't need a neat definition.
Absolutely. And the source then brilliantly connects this to Nietzsche's critique of Socrates, which adds this whole other layer.
Nietzsche, okay, how does he fit in?
Nietzsche talked about two fundamental forces in ancient Greek culture. The Apollonian,
Which is?
measured, balanced, rational, ordered, clear. Think logic, structure, self-restraint. Apollo.
Got it. And the other?
The Dionysian, dark, visceral, wild, intuitive, chaotic, passionate, emerging from the depths, harder to grasp. Dionysus.
Okay, order versus chaos, reason versus instinct, maybe.
Sort of.
Yeah.
And Nietzsche argued that Socrates' massive influence led to an excessive rise of rationalism. Too much Apollo, too much emphasis on the Apollonian.
And this suppressed the Dionysian.
Exactly. It disrupted the balance. Nietzsche called it yang without eating, meaning yang without its necessary counterpart, yin. All clarity, no depth, all reason, no vital chaos or intuition.
And he saw this as a problem, a loss.
A huge problem. He felt it stifled a crucial part of human vitality and creativity. And he made this statement that resonates perfectly with Fat Tony. What is not intelligible to me is not necessarily unintelligent.
There it is again.
Perhaps there is a realm of wisdom from which the logician is exiled. The logician, the pure rationalist, might be blind to certain kinds of deep, effective wisdom precisely because it can't be neatly defined or logically proven.
Wow. So mistaking the unintelligible for the unintelligent is fragile thinking. You dismiss valuable stuff because it doesn't fit your neat, rational box.
Exactly. And interestingly, Nietzsche actually used the phrase creatively destructive and destructively creative, talking about Dionysus. He understood antifragility, that growth and real knowledge often require embracing that chaotic Dionysian element, the intuitive, the unpredictable, the non-rational.
This really does shift how you think about knowledge. It's not just about definitions and logic. It's about respecting the limits of reason and valuing that tacit, embodied wisdom that maybe you can't fully explain.
And what's fascinating is how many other thinkers across history have echoed this critique of pure rationalism. It's not just Taleb or Nietzsche, it's a recurring theme.
Oh yeah, like who else?
Well, the source mentions Seneca, the Roman Stoic. He had a richer view of human nature than just reason versus chaos. He included things like strength, vitality. Wisdom wasn't just defining things, it was living robustly.
Okay, who else?
Ernst Renan, 19th century French thinker. He said truth resides exclusively in the nuances, and that logic, a useless instrument for finding truth in the moral and the political sciences. Direct shot at over-reliance on logic in complex human affairs.
Sounds like Fat Tony would agree with that.
Completely. Or think about Cato the Elder back in Rome. He hated Greek philosophy. He thought Socrates was destroying the foundations of society by questioning the traditional heuristics, the wisdom passed down by elders.
The stuff that worked, even if nobody wrote down the rules.
Exactly. Cato saw Socrates as a kind of tyrant, dismantling practical knowledge.
And this connects to more modern thinkers, too.
Definitely. Edmund Burke, arguing against the French Revolution's radical rationalist overhaul, he advocated for small, careful experiments respecting tradition and accumulated wisdom. Michael Oakeshott, arguing traditions embody this filtered collective knowledge you can't just get from a textbook.
Wittgenstein, too, right. Always wrestling with the limits of language, the green lumber problem. Can language even capture reality fully?
Precisely. Hayek, arguing against central planning because knowledge is distributed, emerges spontaneously through things like prices. Though the source notes Hayek kind of missed optionality as another key emergent factor.
Levi Strauss, showing the complex, coherent logic within supposedly primitive, non-literate cultures.
Yeah, their holistic ways of thinking weren't necessarily less sophisticated than our science.
And John Gray today, constantly warning against human hubris, the idea that science and reason are the answer to everything, showing how progress can be a mirage if it ignores deeper wisdom.
All these voices, across centuries, they're all pointing to this same core idea. There's vital knowledge, effective ways of acting, deep wisdom that exists outside the realm of neat definitions and pure rational explanation.
It's about respecting the limits of our own analytical minds and valuing that know-how that Fat Tony represents.
It's a crucial thread in Antifragile, a deep skepticism about the sufficiency of articulated definitional knowledge for navigating the real world.
Which brings us right back to Fat Tony's worldview. It's not about true or false, that's academic. For Tony, it's sucker or non-sucker.
Exactly. It's about consequences, payoff.
This feels like such a radical departure from how we're usually taught to think, especially in like philosophy or science where truth is the ultimate goal.
It is radical. Tony's view, and Taleb's argument here, is that exposure is more important than knowledge. Decision effects supersede logic.
Exposure, meaning what you stand to gain or lose.
Yeah. Knowing about a risk doesn't protect you nearly as much as controlling your exposure to that risk. And the source makes this powerful claim. The focus on payoff from your actions instead of studying the structure of the world has been largely missed in intellectual history.
Wow. So we've been focusing on understanding the map, maybe, instead of focusing on not falling off the cliff.
That's a good way to put it. What happens to you is always the most important thing, not the event in itself. Philosophers debate truth. Real people making real decisions worry about payoff, exposure, consequences, fragility, anti-fragility.
And Taleb says true and false, what we think of as belief, they actually play a secondary role.
A poor secondary role, he says, because it is the payoff from the true and false that dominates, and it is almost always asymmetric.
Asymmetric, meaning the consequences of being wrong are usually way bigger or way smaller than the consequences of being right.
Exactly. One consequence is often much, much bigger than the other. So the simple truth of a belief is less important than the potential impact of acting on it, especially if you're wrong.
Okay, this crystallizes it for me. If the potential downside is huge, it doesn't matter how true or probable something seems. You act based on the potential catastrophe.
Precisely. You decide principally based on fragility, not so much as true or false. It's about survival, about avoiding ruin. It's almost primal.
This is a massive shift then. Forget probability, focus on fragility. How catastrophic would it be if this happened? That changes everything for daily decisions.
It really does.
What are some clear examples where we already do this, maybe without thinking about it in these terms?
Airport security is the classic one given.
Yeah.
Think about it. Do we screen everyone because we think every person is likely a terrorist?
Of course not. The probability for any one person is minuscule.
Right. It's statistically false to assume likelihood.
Yeah.
But we do it because we are incredibly fragile to terrorism. The payoff if one person gets through is devastatingly high. The cost of checking is, relatively speaking, low.
So we protect against the fragile exposure, not the probability. Makes sense. What about nuclear reactors? They're super safe statistically, right?
Extremely safe, but we spend billions on redundant safety systems, containment structures, protocols.
Hmm.
Why? Not because we think an explosion is likely next year. It's incredibly
Like
unlikely.
because.
Because we are profoundly fragile to nuclear events. The payoff of a meltdown is catastrophic, unthinkable. So we protect against that extreme fragility regardless of the low probability.
Okay. And personal stuff too, like taking some random pill you find.
Exactly. You wouldn't just swallow it, right?
Yeah.
Even if the probability of it being harmful is low, why not? Because the potential negative payoff poisoning, severe reaction is too high. You're fragile to unknown substances.
So it's all about avoiding the catastrophic outcome, not accurately calculating the odds of it?
Yes. Which makes you question things like scientific confidence levels when applied to the real world.
How so? They seem objective, right? 95% confident, 99% confident.
But they ignore the size of effect, as the source says. That's the fatal flaw in extremistan. A 95% confidence level means a 5% chance of being wrong, but it tells you nothing about how bad it is if you are wrong in that 5% of cases.
Ah, right. If that 5% chance means, I don't know, total financial ruin or death, then 95% confidence suddenly feels pretty useless, maybe even dangerous.
Exactly. It's misleading. Like the example of the manager who rode his bike without a helmet for 15 years.
Yeah, he thinks, see, 100% right, nothing happened. He's basing his truth purely on past data.
But Taleb points out, one single random event and you will be no more. His past survival gives him false confidence because he's ignoring the fragility, the catastrophic potential payoff of that one crash.
It's like the Lindy effect in reverse for fragile things. The longer something fragile has survived without breaking, maybe the closer it is to its breaking point. Past performance is no guarantee.
Especially for fragile things, yeah. For non-fragile, Lindy-compatible things like ideas or technologies, long survival suggests future survival. But for a human without a helmet, or maybe a highly leveraged company, long survival might just mean luck running out.
Or the plane crash example. You wouldn't board a plane if they said, we're 99% confident this flight will be safe, would you?
Absolutely not. Because that 1% possibility represents an unacceptable asymmetric downside. Your life.
So probability calculations, outside of maybe a casino, they just don't capture what matters in real-world decisions.
Probability does not work in real world. It is the payoff that matters. That's the blunt summary from the source. Our instincts are often wired for consequences, for avoiding ruin, not for calculating precise odds of rare events.
And this connects back to the green lumber fallacy and black swans. It's not just about predicting the event.
No, the common mistake is focusing only on prediction, trying to build better models, get better forecasts.
But Taleb says that's inefficient.
Vastly less effective, he argues, than the alternative. Modify your exposure and learn to get out of trouble. Don't try to predict the tidal wave perfectly. Build a house on higher ground or learn how to swim really well.
Manage your fragility, build robustness or anti-fragility rather than relying solely on prediction.
Exactly. And he suggests that a lot of traditional wisdom, even religious heuristics, often did exactly that, guided people towards managing exposure to the unknown, rather than pretending they could predict it all.
Which raises that big question. Are we even asking the right questions if all our effort goes into prediction instead of building resilience? Building systems that actually benefit from disorder, not just survive it.
That's the core of anti-fragility.
Okay, this is powerful stuff. And it leads us right into the final and maybe most controversial section of this deep dive, which is applying this lens of fragility to our institutions, particularly a pretty sharp critique of modern education.
Yeah, Taleb and the sources here really don't hold back. It connects directly back to that Fat Tony wisdom, the value of doing over just theorizing.
The core claim is what? Doing is wiser.
Doing is wiser than you are prone to believe and more rational. It's about puncturing the myth of the expert who just lectures, the lecturing birds how to fly idea.
So, questioning the real-world impact of organized research and academic knowledge?
Yes. The argument presented is stark. There's no empirical evidence to support the statement that organized research, as it's currently structured and marketed by universities, actually leads to the great things it promises. The Soviet Harvard idea, he calls it.
Soviet Harvard. Wow, why is he so skeptical? What are these institutions missing?
A key reason given is their absence of optionality. They don't harness randomness, trial and error, second-order effects in the way real-world innovation often happens. They tend to rely on teleological science, science aimed at a specific, predefined goal. as opposed to tinkering, exploring, allowing for unexpected discoveries that emerge from the process itself, not from a grand plan. He argues that this linear, goal-driven approach misses how genuine breakthroughs often occur non-linearly, unpredictably.
Okay, so they're not structured to capture anti-fragility, the benefits of randomness.
That's the argument. And then the critique gets even sharper when it turns to higher education, especially elite universities.
Yeah, the source calls them a status, luxury good, like a fancy handbag.
Explicitly compared to a Louis Vuitton bag or a Cartier watch. The implication is that a huge part of their value proposition is signaling status, networking, credentialing strength, not necessarily pure knowledge transfer or societal advancement as a whole.
And this creates a burden.
A huge drag on the middle-class parent, the source says, who are pouring savings into these institutions, may be buying into a narrative that doesn't fully hold up in terms of collective benefit.
And where does that money go?
The argument is it's automatically transferred to these rent extractors, administrators, real estate developers, maybe even some professors, benefiting from inflated costs. The source uses the term racketeering.
That is incredibly strong language.
Yeah.
Racketeering.
It's meant to be provocative, clearly. The point isn't necessarily that every individual involved is bad, but that the system might function in a way that extracts value disproportionately.
Yeah.
While individuals might feel they need that decent university name to get a job in the current system.
Collectively, society might not be advancing as much as we think from this specific model of organized education.
That's the controversial claim, and it leads to this final pointed question. Which scam in history has lasted forever?
Implying that this current model of higher education, with its escalating costs and maybe questionable collective value, is itself fragile.
Fragile, yes, because it's been growing without external stresses. It hasn't really been forced to prove its value robustly against alternatives or survive real-world pressures, perhaps propped up by student loans and societal beliefs. The implication is it might be heading for a collapse or at least a major disruption.
Okay. Wow. So what does this mean for us then? For learners, parents, citizens, it sounds like a call to be much more critical.
It's definitely a call to be critical, to question the received wisdom about where real knowledge and value come from, to look beyond the brand name or the official credential.
And maybe apply the barbell strategy to our own learning. Secure a baseline, maybe, but actively seek out those high upside, less conventional learning opportunities.
That seems like a very Talebian approach, yes.
Yeah.
Be aware of the hidden fragilities in systems that look stable. Prioritize outcomes, resilience, practical know-how, the fat Tony stuff, perhaps over just intellectual status or definitions.
It's a challenge to seek out genuine, robust value wherever it might be found, and not just follow the established path unquestioningly.
I think that sums it up well. It's about questioning the unquestioned.
So, quite a journey today. We've really dived deep into anti-fragility. We unpacked the barbell strategy, that counterintuitive idea for navigating uncertainty.
Secure base, unlimited upside.
Then we staged that philosophical clash, the definition-hungry Socrates versus the payoff-focused fat Tony, which really forced us to rethink truth versus consequence in decision-making.
Yeah, the sucker-non-sucker distinction.
Yeah.
Consequences matter most.
And we saw how these ideas lead to some pretty radical critiques of our institutions, especially higher education, questioning their structure and their fragility.
It definitely shines a light on the potential value of those often overlooked figures.
Ooh.
The unreasonable mavericks, engineers, freelance entrepreneurs, innovative artists, and anti-academic thinkers who have been reviled by history.
Why them?
Because they often had the guts to live and act in a world they knew they didn't fully understand. They embraced the uncertainty, maybe followed intuition, used heuristics, and they thrived. They weren't paralyzed by the need for perfect definitions.
They lived Fat Tony's philosophy, perhaps without naming it. They enjoyed the mystery.
Perhaps.
So here's a final thought for everyone listening, something to chew on. Considering all this, what unspoken intuitive truths might you be living by? Things that guide you effectively, help you navigate, but that you couldn't easily articulate or define. What practical wisdom, what know-how serves you well, even if it doesn't fit a neat logical explanation? And what joys of ignorance, that effective, unarticulated understanding might we lose if we insist on defining absolutely everything?
That's a great question to ponder. Where does your own Fat Tony wisdom reside?
We really encourage you to think about these ideas. Look for those barbell opportunities in your own life. Where can you cap the downside and open up the upside?
And maybe just maybe start questioning the questions themselves, just like Fat Tony taught.
Until next time, stay curious, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.